That's the amazing thing for the bourgeoisie in all of this, is that it's people saying you have to solve this thing before you do the thing that threatens the bourgeoisie. And it's a thing that can't be solved unless you threaten the bourgeoisie.
Exactly. Yep, that's the conundrum.
We asked Gooby what police do.
We did, because outside the window, outside our neighborhood, there were several police cars for it seemed to be an accident or some kind of commotion, whatever. And there were a lot of police cars. And Gooby was like, there are police there. And we were like, oh, what do police do, Gooby? And she goes, he do nothing. And I just loved a 4-year-old saying, he do nothing.
What do police do? Well, they don't do anything for me. Yeah. They sure do keep things nice and cozy for the man, though.
Yeah. We should do a police do nothing.
I like that. Sure. I like that. That's a good idea.
That is.
But then there's also the fact that Gooby calls muffins nuffins.
Yes.
So it's possible that she thinks that they are bakers.
Maybe.
They make muffins.
I don't think she's seen.
I doubt it.
But anyway, we asked Bubba, what do police do? Who's older? And he said they throw people in jail and poop on them.
Yes.
And I said, you know what?
I mean, they both have pretty good answers.
Yeah.
Tighten your buttholes. It's time for Pact. I'm the P, Peter Coffin, ACD, Miss Astronaut Cowboy Doctor, right here. Those abbreviated letters form the word Pact, which is a word that you say with one syllable. We put up a new episode every week. We stream to record these episodes on Sunday. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in.
All right. We have been reading The Social Basis of the Woman Question by Alexandra Kollontai from 1909, wherein she is exploring through a Socratic questioning framework. Can a separate ideological movement of feminism be compatible with class struggle? And should there be a separate feminist movement dissociated from the general social question that unites women across classes? Is there that? Should there be that? And then specifically takes a large section of this essay to talk about that in the context of the family and how women across the bourgeoisie, across the proletariat, share a similar oppression as spouses, as mothers, people simultaneously working or social climbing in the case of bourgeois women, or doing bourgeois women things.
Shopping.
Doing those multiple roles, they share a similar oppression within the role of the family.
That is what a feminist is asserting, that women are able to unite along gender lines or sex lines rather than class lines, because ultimately these material needs affect women of all classes the same. Put aside the class stuff, we have to solve the women stuff, or any other identity on the intersectionality spectrum.
Any indicator of demographic, economic, or health-related marginalization.
Basically, identity politics doesn't do what it says it does.
Yeah.
And I'll quote just a quick thing from the beginning, speaking about class lines, the material relation of class. Only through the disappearance of these factors, only the evolution of those forces, which at some point in the past gave rise to the subjection of women, is able in a fundamental way to influence and change their social position. In other words, women can become truly free and equal only in a world organized along new social and productive lines, i.e., a proletarian state. Essentially, she is saying that all of the people who are saying, we got to solve patriarchy first before we try socialism, or we got to solve racism first before we try socialism, or we got to solve gender questions before we go to socialism. No, because all of those things...
No, I don't want that.
No, I don't want that.
The Pumpkin Man is an ML. But all of those things, exist within a coercive paradigm of class society, specifically capitalism in its imperial stage at this point. Those things are not changeable at their base fundamental level without changing the base fundamental level of our relationship to power.
Right. So not only is it not needed to separate this movement because it's redundant, but it is also not possible to achieve its stated aims.
And unfortunately, it also functions as a roadblock because you have petty bouge and full bouge women and everybody they fooled in the working class saying, no, we've got to solve this first. We shouldn't be trying to do class struggle. We have pressing issues in our identity currently.
And then you're a hamster wheel trying to solve those issues without changing productive relations.
Exactly. They're not looking at these things as fluid ideas. Neoliberalism has a tendency to just fucking like flatline history and ignore that conditions change through history. In their minds, it's all like, it's like this. It's always going to be like this unless people.
Static.
Yeah, it's static. Exactly. It's not in flux. It's not moving. They view it in death, not in life, as Ingalls says.
Love that.
We got some pushback, speaking of Ingalls, on some of Kollontai's views.
Yes, we did. Basically, it's Engels criticizing people who prioritize issues of class without caring about women's liberation.
Mm-hmm.
And that's completely compatible with what we're saying.
It's not just compatible with what we're saying. It's what we're saying.
Yeah. Like
we
that
believe
women's liberation, dismantling white supremacy, all these fucking things are inherently part of class struggle and can only be achieved, dismantling those things can only be achieved by integrating them into class struggle.
Well, yeah.
And resolving class contradictions of capitalism. And so some guy posted that as like an own, and it's like, that's exactly what we're saying.
Yeah.
Those aims that feminism purports to strive for are not what we're against. We're against an ideological feministic movement that's dissociated from class struggle.
Exactly.
Because that renders it entirely ineffective.
We're against a metaphysical women's question. That's what we're against.
There it is.
Or any other identity. Another piece of criticism we got was from me. I posted in my own words what Kollontai said. I don't remember exactly how I said it, but it was the one where it talked about how feminists work within the framework of now, avoiding the fact that the actual framework of bourgeois society is where that inequality comes from, like class society at its root. I didn't change anything about it. I didn't make it any more controversial. I just said plainly and flatly in 280 characters what Kollontai is saying. And somebody came back at me saying, you should read Alexandra Kollontai. She'll set you straight. This is just pure misogyny. And it's like, my response to them was the Alexandra Kollontai quote that I was paraphrasing as an image, and I did not hear back from them.
Anyway, so where we are now is talking about women's struggles across class lines in the context of marriage and the family. And she's in the middle of the Socratic questioning, and we stopped at this point because I got tired. Mm-hmm. And I have a bedtime. So I'll reread our cliffhanger where we're talking about the right to maternity, the ability to participate in motherhood in a family dynamic and a relational dynamic that's not coercive. But you can apply this all people who have vajayjays to be to be parents in a way that is not coercive. She's positing the question of, isn't this something that unites women across class lines? So she says, the right to maternity is the kind of question that touches not only women from the bourgeois class, but also to an even greater extent, proletarian women as well. The right to be a mother. These are golden words that go straight to any woman's heart and force that heart to beat faster. the right to feed one's own child with one's own milk and to attend the first signs of its awakening consciousness, the right to care for its tiny body and shield its tender soul from the thorns and sufferings of the first steps in life. What mother would not support these demands? So how is this not something that unites even bourgeois and proletarian women and peasant women across class lines? That's something that so touches every human who can birth a bambino.
Yeah.
And it's true. I read that paragraph last time and was like,
like in the devil's advocate question we are getting right now, it affects the Queen of England in the same way it affects a peasant. Before we go any further, let's take a quick break to remind people that we have a Patreon, and that is how we are funded. We're not funded by any NGOs. We're not funded by some content house like Nebula, whose parent company, CuriosityStream, has had a USAID member on its board since its founding. No, we actually work for our money outside of the podcast. So if you want to support the podcast, if you want to help us in our sort of long game aspirations with this thing, please become a patron at patreon.com/pactpod. That's PACDPOD. Also, when you're a patron, you get access to things like we're in the process of gathering enough people to make it worth it to send out free stickers and promotional cards. Patrons are accomplices to the crimes that we are committing. But patrons are a huge help. They help further our aims, our goals. We want to spread. We want to become bigger. We want people to hear this stuff. You guys rule. We rely on you. We need you, not only to become patrons, but also to spread the word. If you can't chip in $2 to our Patreon, just tell a friend. Make them listen to us. Force them. Don't actually force. Like, that would be weird. And I don't think that they would like the podcast if that was the way that happened. Like, don't force people to watch our podcast.
no forcing. I already talked about that in another episode.
Yeah. I think if you pin somebody against the wall and say, hey, listen to Pact, they would probably go, ooh, I don't like Pact. Anyway, that's patreon.com/pactpod. Again, thanks a ton. And let's get back to Pact.
Okay, but it would seem that we have again stumbled on an issue that could serve as a moment of unity between women of different social layers. It would seem that we have found at last the bridge uniting women of the two hostile worlds. Let us look closer to discover what the progressive bourgeois women understand by the right to maternity. Then we can see whether, in fact, proletarian women can agree with the solutions to the problem of maternity envisioned by the bourgeois fighters for equal rights. In the eyes of its eager apologists, maternity possesses an almost sacred quality, striving to smash the false prejudices that brand a woman for engaging in a natural activity, the bearing of a child. Because the activity has not been sanctified by the law, the fighters for the right to maternity have bent the stick in the other direction. For them, maternity has become the aim of a woman's life. So she's saying that a woman should be able to give birth and be a mother without being married, or without, they didn't use this term at the time, but the nuclear family unit. And now she's introducing the concept that bourgeois women are framing the issue of right to maternity as something that should be the sole goal of a woman's life.
Mm-hmm.
To the dismay of the women proletariat. Do you want to read this?
And then you finish off, because you're the one with the uterus.
Okay.
Ellen Key's devotion to the obligations of maternity and the family forces her to give an assurance that the isolated family unit will continue to exist in a society transformed along socialist lines. The only change, as she sees it, will be that all the attendant elements of convenience or of material gain will be excluded from the marriage union, which will be concluded along mutual inclinations. Without rituals or formalities, love and marriage will be truly synonymous. But the isolated family unit is the result of the modern individualistic world with its rat race, its pressures, its loneliness. The family is a product of the monstrous capitalist system. And yet, Key hopes to bequeath the family to socialist society. Blood and kinship ties at present often serve, it is true, as the only support in life, as the only refuge in times of hardship and misfortune. But will they be morally or socially necessary in the future? Key does not answer this question. She has too loving a regard for the ideal family, the egoistic unit of the middle bourgeoisie, which the devotees of the bourgeois structure of society look at with such reverence. But it is not only the talented, though erratic Ellen Key who loses her way in the social contradictions. There is probably no other question which socialists themselves are so little in agreement as the question of marriage and the family. Were we to try and organize a survey among socialists, the results would probably be very curious. Does the family wither away? Or are there grounds for believing that the family disorders of the present are only a transitory crisis? Will the present form of the family be preserved in the future society, or will it be buried with the modern capitalist system? These are questions which might well receive very different answers. With the transfer of educative functions from the family to society, the last tie holding together the modern isolated family will be loosened. The process of disintegration will proceed at an even faster pace, and the pale silhouettes of future marital relations will begin to emerge. What can we say about these indistinct silhouettes, hidden as they are by present-day influences? Does one have to repeat that the present compulsory form of marriage will be replaced by the free union of loving individuals? The ideal of free love, drawn by the hungry imagination of women fighting for their emancipation, undoubtedly corresponds to some extent to the norm of relationships between the sexes that society will establish. However, social influences are so complex and their interactions so diverse that it is impossible to foretell what the relationships of the future, when the whole system has fundamentally been changed, will be like. If you decide that you're going to dictate a view of the family to the world as it is now, you're wrong, period. That's just it. There's no other way to say it.
I appreciate that as a historical materialist, and that she is refusing to engage in any utopian speculation about what exactly the family
Well,
was.
that statement at the end, which is, it is impossible to tell. You can't tell what that is going to look like without having lived the history up to that point.
And that's kind of what the point is, in that that's what bourgeois women are doing. And
Exactly,
that's why
exactly.
Their struggle for the right to maternity and imposing this necessity of motherhood beyond the capitalist familial unit, and motherhood as a necessity, as a platonic goal for all women, is disconnected from the reality of proletarian women.
Mm-hmm. And further, just to elaborate a little bit on her actual viewpoints outside of this essay, she was an advocate for free love, but free love, it's an all-encapsulating term that could basically mean anything.
Right. Love that is not in a coercive context.
Exactly. She's not saying like crazy orgies everywhere. Like in theory, that could be under the umbrella of what she's saying.
Right. In theory. But she's also very clear about how, specifically, and I quote Alexandra Kollontai, most cisgender heterosexual men utilize polyamory to cheat on their girlfriends rather than to experience non-coercive romantic relationships. And that is a quote from on the...
I mean, that's not exactly what she said, but she does say that.
Yeah. No, she's very clear about how the idea of free love, even in this essay, and I think we read it in the second part, even in this essay, how because of class relations and the patriarchal superstructure that emerges from that, it automatically lends to women being abused.
But the slowly maturing evolution of relations between the sexes is clear evidence that the ritual marriage and compulsive isolated family are doomed to disappear. In fact, we, living 100 years later, see that. Like daycare, for instance, is an example of that familial relation changing. Mm-hmm. The fact that you have many people involved in capitalism, might I add.
And it's for profit.
Yeah, it adds some less savory elements to it. But even in capitalism, these relations that she's talking about disappearing have to some extent disappeared. When somebody says, we need to not have parents, we need to have communal raising of children, that's not how raising of children is any. Like, it's not the 1950s anymore. Yeah. You actually do have communal raising of children. It's just that it's for profit and therefore not the ideal version of it.
No, and bad.
I don't know. I think the people that are helping raise our kids at like school and daycare are good. I like them.
I do, but I don't like paying them.
Oh, no, I don't like paying the money at all. I do not like giving the money.
Anyway, regardless, the way that she's ending this section is that no matter what, the coercive economic element of the family will be gone.
Yeah.
And while that is something that in theory and implication that bourgeois and proletarian women agree on, the prescriptive way that bourgeois women advocate for the right to maternity as a platonic goal for each and every woman is inconsistent with the reality of proletarian women.
And also, again, to ground it in current events, the coercive element of having a child is on display in the fact that we're fighting over which week you can abort a child at.
Which is why we started in the Handmaid's Tale stuff.
Yeah.
All right, last page. Let's fucking get through it. The struggle for political rights. The final section. The feminists answer our criticisms by saying, even if the arguments behind our defense of the political rights of women seem to you mistaken, is the importance of the demand itself, which is equally urgent for feminists and for representatives of the working class, thereby reduce? Cannot the women of the two social camps, for the sake of their common political aspirations, surmount the barriers of class antagonism that divide them? Surely they are capable of waging a common struggle against the hostile forces that surround them. Division between bourgeois and proletarian is inevitable as far as other questions are concerned, but in the case of this particular question, the feminists imagine, the women of the various social classes have no differences.
Which is
horseshit.
Yeah. The dead giveaway here. Surely they're capable of waging a common struggle against the hostile forces that surround them. When the hostile forces for proletarian women are the bourgeoisie, the people that the bourgeois women are ultimately aligned with on all of these other issues.
Yeah, and ultimately striving to obtain equality within.
Yes, exactly. As repeatedly said throughout this essay, the feminists ultimately more or less ignore the proletarian women's needs and in fact exploit them.
Feminists keep returning to these arguments with bitterness and bewilderment, seeing preconceived notions of partisan loyalty in the refusal of representatives of the working class to join forces with them in the struggle for women's political rights. Is this really the case?
It's literally like her saying, these aren't the exact lines that existed at the time of writing, but she's saying the feminists call the proletarian women Republicans for not joining the feminist cause.
Yeah, no, 100%. Absolutely. Is there a complete identity of political aspirations, or does antagonism hinder the creation of an indivisible, above-class army of women in this instance as in all others? We have to answer this question before we can outline the tactics that proletarian women will employ in winning political rights for their sex. So again, there is no unity between women that transcends class.
Absolutely not.
Because the way that these material impacts on women occur has different ramifications.
Well, yeah, and this can easily be seen when a proletarian woman is attempting to find a job, period, versus a bourgeois woman saying more female CEOs.
Yeah, exactly. The feminists declare themselves to be on the side of social reform, and some of them even say they are in favor of socialism, in the far distant future, of course. But they are not intending to struggle in the ranks of the working class for the realization of these aims. The best of them believe, with a naive sincerity, that once the deputy seats are within reach, they will be able to cure the social sores which have, in their view, developed because men, with their inherent egoism, have been masters of the situation. This bitch. However good the intentions of individual groups of feminists towards the proletariat, whenever the question of class struggle has been posed, they have left the battlefield in a fright. They find that they do not wish to interfere in alien causes and prefer to retire to their bourgeois liberalism, which is so comfortably familiar. I don't know how to say that better.
I don't think it can be said better.
No. However much the bourgeois feminists try to repress the true aim of their political desires, however much they assure their younger sisters that involvement in political life promises immeasurable benefits for the women of the working class. Again, us breaking the glass ceiling, us being represented, us being in the bourgeoisie will help you guys, the poors. It's so beneficial. The bourgeois spirit that pervades the whole feminist movement gives a class coloring even to the demand for equal political rights with men, which would seem to be a general women's demand. It would seem that way. But the class character of that struggle prevents it from being beneficial to women across class lines.
Just to quickly emphasize a few words there. The bourgeois spirit that pervades the whole feminist movement, the entire thing, even like the proletarian people that buy the ideology, they are buying into a bourgeois lie that they don't need to pay attention to class, and that class is not something that you find by material distinction. It's in fact quantitative or a social identity. Feminism, Alexandra Kollontai says, is bullshit.
Yes. Different aims and understandings of how political rights are to be used create an unbridgeable gulf between bourgeois and proletarian women. There is no possible way that there is women's unity that transcends class. This does not contradict the fact that the immediate tasks of the two groups of women coincide to a certain degree. Yeah, there are problems that affect bourgeois and proletarian women. The crux of the problem, for example, like I guess just the overarching thing, patriarchy. It's the same thing that is impacting them. Or like the coercive family unit, or not having equal pay. Like those are the same things, but in their material impacts are different because of the class ramifications. Coincide to a certain degree. For the representatives of all classes which have received access to political power strive above all to achieve a review of the civil code, which in every country to a greater or lesser extent discriminates against women. Women press for legal changes that create more favorable conditions of labor for themselves. They stand together against the regulations, legalizing prostitution, etc. However, the coincidence of these immediate tasks is of a purely formal nature. For class interests determines that the attitude of the two groups to these reforms is sharply contradictory. So the approach, the attitude, because of their ramifications, because of the interests that intersect differently from bourgeois women in these issues compared to proletarian women in these issues, that changes everything and makes those interests incompatible with one another.
Also, speaking of the word intersect, this paragraph might as well be a criticism directly of intersectionality, as it's referring to the formal legal ramifications of these things.
Yeah.
Because that's where intersectionality comes from. It's a legal framework to be used as an analytic in court cases in which identity is an issue, which, I mean, as long as you're in this system, there is a need for it.
Yeah.
It's not used that way, and ultimately is used to point out liabilities and how they can be avoided.
Mm-hmm. All right, last paragraph. Class instinct, whatever the feminists say, always shows itself to be more powerful than the noble enthusiasms of above-class politics. That sounds very familiar. The moral justice that we're fighting for these social indicators of marginalization beyond class. Class can wait to be talked about. This is important.
It is. It's literally like, we have to solve this first before we can even think about socialism. Until we solve this, socialism is a white male thing.
Yeah. And then we can't solve it because we're still in capitalism. So,
yeah, exactly. Well, that's the amazing thing for the bourgeoisie in all of this, is that it's people saying you have to solve this thing before you do the thing that threatens the bourgeoisie. And it's a thing that can't be solved unless you threaten the bourgeoisie.
Exactly. Yep, that's the conundrum. So long as the bourgeois women and their younger sisters are equal in their inequality, the former can, with complete sincerity, make great efforts to defend the general interests of women. But once the barrier is down and the bourgeois women have received access to political activity, the recent defenders of the rights of all women become enthusiastic defenders of the privileges of their class. Lenin describes how this happens in State and Revolution, describes how AOC, Bernie Sanders, India Walton, how their indoctrination into the electorate renders them completely neutralized, sterilized, and ineffective.
Well, I mean, watch fucking AOC defend Biden at any point. It's just disgusting.
So fucking gross. Anyways, content to leave the younger sisters with no rights at all. So once they've got their cookie, they're done.
It really is that. It's the glass ceiling being broke with the floor being built immediately.
Yes.
That was criticism I made in 2015 that I got shit on for.
Thus, when the feminists talk to working women about the need for a common struggle to realize some general women's principle, women of the working class are naturally distrustful because, of course, that wouldn't fucking work.
Why would they be naturally distrustful of people who rule over them?
Right.
Oh, do you trust the people who lord over you?
And who abandoned you after they got, again, they're not. So my closing comments are pretty similar to my closing comments in part 1 and part 2, I imagine. And then Kollontai, ahead of her time, but not, because really what this shows is that the issue that was so salient in 1909 continues to be ever relevant today. Mm-hmm. Not only is feminism or insert any other social justice movement unnecessary to dissociate from the general class struggle, but also, secondly, if you do that, it will be ineffective in what it claims to want to do.
Even a hindrance.
Well, yeah, because it's making people think that they're doing something when they're not, which is so fucking awesome for the bourgeoisie, right?
It is. It's fantastic. They love it. They love to see it.
That's why they support all of it. It's literally profitable now.
Oh, absolutely. The thing I would leave people with who maybe don't actually get into reading theory unless somebody on YouTube, has the inkling to do it. Like every once in a while, we'll do something. We did Socialism, Utopian Scientific. We did Imperialism and the Split in Socialism. And now we've done this. I would say to those people, you're missing people from 100 years ago saying things that will blow your fucking mind how much they sound like what we're missing today. And this isn't like a nostalgic return to their time. It's that we haven't progressed beyond that time in terms of material relations. The things that we've gained are permissive. It all gets rolled back because it's all eventually something that the bourgeoisie don't need anymore. They don't need to justify something anymore. Or they've justified it to such an extreme point that you woke Ouroboros the thing. Look back at these people. Look back at Lenin. Look back at Engels. Look back at Marx. Look back at Alexandra Kollontai. Look back at any of these people who are affiliated with the lineage that goes from Marx and on up until you start getting the revisionists claiming that the state, for instance, exists to mediate between the classes as opposed to exists to hold up the class contradiction, a la Kautsky. Go back to the basics. A lot of the time you're discouraged from reading theory now because it's ableist. It's ableist to read theory. It's not. You can do it. You are capable of it. And I'm not saying that to browbeat you. I'm saying that because we care about women's liberation. We care about queer people. We care about racism. We care about all of this stuff.
Of course we do, because we are advocating for class struggle, fucking idiots.
And that's it for Pact. Thanks again for watching or listening. I'm Peter. This is Miss Astronaut Cowboy Doctor. To help us out, click like, follow, subscribe, join our Discord, leave us 5-star reviews on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. To support us, become a patron at patreon.com/PactPod. That's PACDPOD. Thanks so much. Come back next week.